So if you have methane SIBO and you've been wondering where your methane SIBO came from, it's a really good question. It's a bit of a stumper for some people. They say, look, my gut just went south and I don't know why, and maybe it was this or maybe it was that. Then today I want to cover the top reasons why you might develop methane SIBO. And the big piece here, and the big piece to kind of remember is, depends on the study, 30 to 50% of the population produces methane, right? But 30 to 50% of the population is not dealing with the common symptoms of methane SIBO: slow motility, sluggish gut, things just sitting there, bloating, distension, gas, abdominal pain, sometimes burping, sometimes reflux. And then the really big one would be constipation. You know, you could go on record saying that up to 50% of the population produces methane, up to 50% of the population is not presenting like that. So the question is, why have you developed these symptoms? Two reasons: either the methane gas has gone high, you gotta figure that out. Why is it going high, too high? Or your gut has become sensitized or reactive or kind of, responsive to moderate to high levels of methane. So we're going to get into that. There's going to be a little bit of overlap here, but the really big pieces that I see would be slow motility as a driver of methane SIBO. And you might just say, look, slow motility is a consequence of methane SIBO. You're going to see a lot of these vicious loops with methane SIBO. It's something that I am fascinated by and I see all the time. I'm kind of a little bit obsessed with how this bug, this archaea, can actually produce the environment that it likes to live in. It kind of creates a perfect home, and then the perfect home creates more methane, and then you just kind of get stuck in this little loop that can be very hard to break out of for some people. It can be incredibly treatment resistant for the wrong person. So if you think about what would slow down gut motility and the ability to kind of sweep things through and move things through from your mouth to the toilet bowl, there can be a whole bunch of reasons, but the big mama, the kind of piece that I'm looking for, it's actually on my intake form, would be past food poisonings, and this is incredibly underappreciated. People often say, look, I had an iron gut, I traveled through India, I went to Bali, and then I got one food poisoning event that just absolutely knocked me, sideways, and now my gut just kind of won't work since then. And so the really big mechanism of action that we're just starting to tease out there is the long-lasting kind of post-infectious IBS presentation of people who have experienced food poisoning events. And it can be up to, again, depends on the study, 10% of people who experience food poisoning can wind up with chronic, long-lasting IBS symptoms. And the mechanism there has got a lot to do with a loss of the ability to regulate motility, gut motility. Big story short, a lot of big words there. Big story short, you get food poisoning and your gut stops being able to sweep things out as effectively. The other really big piece, again, we're talking about slow motility, would be chronic stress. And this has got a lot to do with the vagal nerve, and there's a few other kind of mechanism of actions there. But the vagal nerve is a nerve that innervates digestion, among many other kind of, autonomic kind of nervous system functions. And it typically, again, the kind of numbers vary, but it typically operates in the parasympathetic nervous system set point as opposed to the sympathetic. And again, big words, we're talking about rest or digest. Are you calm? Are you regulated? Or fight or flight? If you're running away from the tiger, you're not prioritizing digestion, your motility is not going to work. If you are in that rest, calm, ready to digest, ready to kind of assimilate nutrients, that vagal nerve is going to function better, and that helps to regulate smooth muscle contraction and motility through the digestive tract. That's a really big piece why certain apps, things like Nerva, are getting so much success with people, because we're just in this stressed out state constantly. We've got bills due, we've got services on the car, we've got work, and we're piling up, and interest rates are going up, and everything costs $1 million now. So, we're in this kind of peak sympathetic dominant stress state, and we're not regulating our digestive tract by coming back to that rest and digest. an app like Nerva, no affiliation, helps you, kind of Headspace as well. There's all these kind of mindfulness practices, again, no affiliation, help you kind of regulate and come back down into that parasympathetic rest and digest. Part of that consequence is improving gut motility. So another big piece, if we're talking about motility, would be surgeries done on the kind of pelvis, the digestive tract, even things like C-sections can impact digestion and motility, and whether that's kind of adhesions building up or scar tissue. I do see a lot of this with certain endometriosis patients where their digestive function just is not operating well because of all these kind of, inflammatory processes and adhesions going on in their pelvis, and maybe that's directly related to their digestive tract. I've seen patients who have had part of their bowels removed because of endometriosis lesions, or whether it's part of this kind of consequence of inflammation from this kind of systemic inflammatory condition. I don't see a lot of adhesions as part of my methane kind of presentation. Maybe I'm not looking for it, maybe I don't have the tools to look for it well. It's on my radar, but it can be hard to pin down. And then the really big question is, what are you going to do about it? I've seen a little bit around visceral manipulation. I haven't seen great success in my patient population for most of my kind of methane SIBO patients. Another big piece on things that slow down gut motility would be mold exposure. This is something that I treat a lot of, I'm very passionate about. I don't suspect it with methane SIBO patients unless there's another kind of constellation of symptoms. Doing a video on that soon, so you can check that out. But the big piece that would make me suspect mold exposure would be slow motility, incomplete bowel movements, methane SIBO that will not shift no matter what we throw at it, and then the other constellation of kind of mold exposed symptoms, allergic presentation, pain, chronic fatigue, and extremely kind of debilitated, extremely unwell. Now, those are the main ones around motility. There's also constipation, which can be just a huge driver of methane SIBO. And you say, look, you listed that as a symptom. That's a consequence of. You can flip that. And, that's the kind of, paradigm that we need to be in when we're thinking about methane. If you are or have been chronically constipated, I've got some patients where we're doing their intake. We say, look, tell me about your gut symptoms. How far back do they go? They say, look, I've been bloated and distended and I've got abdominal pain for the past 5 years, but I've been constipated my whole life. My whole life I've been constipated. That can predispose you for an increase or a bloom of methane, which then can cause constipation. So you wind up in this vicious circle. So if you are constipated and you have been your whole life, or you have been for decades, and then you wound up with methane SIBO, I would be pointing to that. Why did you become constipated? We got to go through that whole kind of like intake piece. Another really big driver that I see, again, it's on my intake form, would be antibiotic exposure. And there's just one study I've found, but I do see it clinically. When you take antibiotics, it's leveling the playing field with bacteria that live in your gut. It's reducing beneficials and less friendly bugs at the same time. And through this process, you get a decrease, sharp decrease for some people, depending on the antibiotic and how long they're on it for, in butyrate producing microbes, species, bacteria. You get low butyrate, that's what I'm trying to say. And then when you get low butyrate, you can see this inverse association where methane actually goes high. And the piece that really nails that down for me, because that's all just a bunch of hot air right now, the piece that really nails that down for me is that when I'm treating patients with very high methane, and we're talking up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, sometimes 100, the worst I've seen lately, I saw one that was at 150 parts per million of methane. It's like a lot of methane. And the big piece there was, when you do stool testing, you often see low butyrate or a deficiency or low butyrate producing species. Okay, great correlation. How does that all make sense? And then when you work on either increasing that butyrate through prebiotics and probiotics, or just supplement high quality butyrate, their symptoms improve. Their methane symptoms improve. Now the last big piece on that antimicrobial kind of motility front with the kind of antibiotics and kind of beyond things that just impact motility would be bile flow. And this is something, again, I'm very, very passionate about. Proper, adequate, sufficient bile flow is a problem for some people with chronic treatment-resistant digestive symptoms. And not only is bile a pro-motility kind of agent in the gut, it stimulates the motility through these receptors. Bile hits the receptors, stimulates motility. It's also an antimicrobial. Think about bile, we think about fat. You eat fat, you squeeze bile out of your gallbladder, it emulsifies and digests fat. But bile also has these other kind of actions on the gut, and one of them is it decreases or kills methane bugs. So, this is a presentation. It doesn't have to be the presentation. It doesn't have to be your presentation, but when you have poor bile flow and high methane, we say, look, is this the reason why? Is this your root cause? Is it a consequence? What's going on here? And the way that you kind of resolve that question is you support bile flow and you see if they feel better. That's the proof in the pudding. So the last piece that I see being overlooked all the time on these root cause drivers of methane SIBO would be medications. And there is a whole class of medications that actually cause constipation. They aren't all mediated through acetylcholine, but if you're looking up your medication, if you start a medication, you become constipated, and you look up mechanism of action and the drug, really big one here is amitriptyline. We've got a bunch of patients on amitriptyline, for pain or for their gut or for sleep, whatever they're taking it for. It is an anticholinergic drug. There are a whole bunch of other anticholinergic drugs, but basically that is blocking acetylcholine function on gut motility. And we're getting back to the nervous system. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that regulates smooth muscle contraction. You can see the click there. Your digestive tract is a smooth muscle, and if it's inhibiting smooth muscle contraction through the gut, anticholinergic medications are going to be part of a possible driver or root cause of your methane SIBO. So when I first started treating methane SIBO, I thought it was all about the bug, kill the bug, everything gets better. I have just flipped that whole model, and we're focusing on motility, we're focusing on bile flow, we're focusing on nervous system set point, reviewing medications, checking for mold exposure. This is the whole kind of jumble, and looking for that thread that you can pull where everything kind of comes into balance, back into balance. And if you kind of related to one or many of those root cause drivers of methane SIBO, it would be worth exploring them first, particularly if you're not seeing results with your methane SIBO protocols. If you're not getting better, you want to go back to the drawing board and figure out why. If you find and resolve that root cause, sometimes that doesn't cure it. Sometimes you have to come back and rerun those frontline methane SIBO treatments, and typically you'd see a lot more success with them. So thanks for watching. If you got something out of it, like, comment, subscribe, really helps grow the channel. And if you are living in Australia or New Zealand and you're looking for support with digestion, then there will be a booking link below.